right, in this presentation, we'll be discussing protein, another one of the fuel nutrients. As a reminder, the three fuel nutrients are carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And caloric value for carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram. For fat, 9 calories per gram. And for protein, once again, 4 calories per gram. Now, protein is necessary for the growth, maintenance, and repair of all body tissues, so it serves a very important role for our bodies. And also, some other roles that protein plays in our body. We've got this first one, necessary for growth, maintenance, and repair. But proteins also help maintain normal balance of body fluids. They're necessary to make enzymes, hormones, and antibodies. So, yeah, where we were looking at carbohydrates end up being the primary source of energy for our bodies. Fats, the primary source of stored fuel for the body. And then if we're looking at protein, we're not seeing a reference here to it being a primary source of energy or a primary source of fuel. And just in general, we don't want our bodies to be shifting into using protein as an energy source. And a part of the reason for that is because of these other important roles that protein has in our body. So protein, in terms of food sources, they're varied. There are a number of them. Not all are equal, and we'll be looking more at that. But proteins, I think what a lot of times comes to mind for people are meat products, beef, chicken, fish, eggs. Um, but protein's also found in a lot of other foods. Protein's found in grains, beans, peas, pastas, rice, seeds, nuts. And so again, I'm just going to encourage you to start looking at nutrition facts labels to see which foods you're consuming that actually have a fair amount of protein in them, and you might be surprised. Okay, the building blocks of protein are called amino acids, and there are a total of at least 20 amino acids. Some of those amino acids are considered essential, and that term essential, what this means is we must consume those through our foods or through our beverages. So we have to be sure that we're actually getting enough of those essential amino acids through our diet. Now, 11 of the amino acids are considered non-essential. And the reason they're considered non-essential is that the body can produce them in quantities necessary. So when I was talking about not all protein sources are equal, um, this is more specifically what I was referring to. Some of our protein sources are really good at providing us with the 9 essential amino acids. Some of them are not as good at doing that for us. So what I like to also explain with proteins is this concept of a complete protein. So a complete protein is a food source, or I guess it could be a beverage source also, that contains all of the essential amino acids. So in general, our food sources that are considered complete proteins are those foods that come from the animal kingdom. So if you're eating beef, chicken, fish. In general, what you're going to be getting are good sources of complete proteins. And again, complete proteins contain all the essential amino acids. So, what might be popping up for some of you is, well, if you're vegan, especially if you're vegan, how are you going to actually um, be able to consume all the essential amino acids? And there are a couple of sources that are plant-based that are complete proteins. Soy. Soy is considered a complete protein. So, for example, if you eat tofu, you're going to be getting your complete proteins there. Um, Quinoa, which is a grain, and it's a grain that's made a pretty big comeback in more recent years. More people are um, interested in and consuming quinoa. It's also a complete protein. So this is actually an area that I think it's important to think about your diet, what proteins you consume, and are you actually consuming complete proteins or in some way ensuring that you're eating or all of the essential amino acids. So let's just take a look at a list of amino acids. You do not need to know this list or even be able to recognize this list. But I like showing it to students because usually there are some things on the list that you will recognize. So here we've got our list of the non-essential amino acids, and over on this side, the essential. And just take a look down through this list to see if there's anything that you're recognizing. Um, some of these amino acids are sold in supplement form, and it's always kind of interesting to me if you are doing amino acid supplementation, take a look and see if the amino acid you're supplementing with is considered to be non-essential or essential. If it's non-essential, your body is probably producing enough of it. And so you may not actually even need to supplement with a non-essential. The essentials, I like to come down and point out tryptophan. Some of you maybe have heard of tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that's found in, for example, turkey. And this particular amino acid is the one that sometimes gets the credit for that sleepiness that we feel after having, a big turkey dinner at Thanksgiving. So usually I have some students that have heard of tryptophan, also lysine. Some students will tell me they've heard of lysine. Some people use the amino acid lysine because they feel as if it helps them with fever blisters. And there's some anecdotal evidence to suggest that might be true, but as of right now, there's no hardcore science that says, hey, yeah, if you take lysine when you're experiencing an outbreak of fever blisters, that will help you out. Um, I've tried it before, and it seemed like maybe initially it was helping me. It could have been a placebo effect, who knows? But long term, I wasn't really experiencing it as incredibly helpful. Another thing I like to mention in this protein section is over in these gold colored boxes. Um, there is no scientific support for the claims made regarding the potential effects of supplementation of specific amino acids. Okay, so if you're spending a lot of money supplementing amino acids, I think this is important to understand. Uh, there's really no scientific basis for that, at least at this point. And then this second gold box, protein supplementation or specific amino acid supplementation, it can interfere with the absorption of other amino acids. So because it's been so incredibly popular to buy protein supplements in the form of powders, I like to just toss this out there because um, I mean it is possible that you're not getting enough protein, uh, but the frequency of that occurring within the typical American diet is not at all common. And protein supplementation, if you're buying protein powders, that can actually get pretty expensive. And it's possible, that you don't really even need it. So we're going to move along here. Um, Once again, protein, it's not considered to be the main source of energy for our bodies, like carbohydrates and fats. Protein can be used for energy, but really our body needs to be using protein for synthesis and repair purposes. So we don't want to place our body in a situation where it's gone through its carbohydrate and fat stores and is using protein as an energy source. There are other really important things that the body needs to be using protein for. And, this is maybe another heads up if you happen to do protein supplementation, especially if it's pretty heavy duty protein supplementation. First of all, if you're consuming more protein than your body can actually utilize, what ends up happening is it will initially get excreted in your urine. And that's why I have a picture of a toilet over here on the side. So it's very possible with that protein powder that you're consuming or that protein beverage that you're consuming that what's happening is you're just excreting it all in your urine. If you are consuming more protein than your body can actually get rid of, so if you're doing too much protein and your body's trying to excrete the excess in the urine, but it can't get rid of it all, it can become stored as fat. And here are a couple of other items. Too much protein can contribute to heart disease, obesity, and certain cancers if the sources are also high in saturated fats and cholesterol. So I want to come back to, I believe I skipped this question earlier in this presentation. That question that was related to what proteins are higher in saturated fats. And you know what, I'm thinking, yeah, I think I did hit on it. But again, as a reminder, um, protein sources from the animal kingdom are going to tend to be higher in saturated or the bad fat, also higher in cholesterol. So we want to be careful there. And too much protein can also have an adverse effect on your bones. It can contribute to a loss of calcium. Um, it's been maybe 6 years back. I had a student in class who was very into bodybuilding, and he was doing it the natural way. And when he turned in his nutrition project, um, I saw that was maybe the first time that I was seeing um, this this overconsumption of protein kind of to the extreme. This particular person was probably consuming 6 eggs a day. And eggs are a great food. They're a great nutritional source. Um, and they are also higher in cholesterol and higher in saturated fat. If you're doing egg whites, that's different. It's the yolk itself that ends up being high in saturated fat. But this particular student was doing just an incredible number of eggs per day, and it was glaringly obvious there was a problem with the project that he turned in. His cholesterol and saturated fat was extremely high. And it was interesting because, I made a note on his project and asked him if he'd noticed that and if he understood that it was primarily related to his consumption or overconsumption of eggs. And anyway, I heard from him probably within the next year. He sent me a quick email, and he had ended up with he just described it as a health related condition related to overconsumption of protein. That's how he actually stated it. So protein, yes, we want to get the amount of protein that we need, but overconsumption, there can be some problems with that. The most basic problem is it may just be a waste of money because it might all just end up in the toilet. Okay, and for those of you that might like to actually sit down and calculate how much protein you need, in other words, how many grams of protein a day you should be consuming. Well, yes, there is truth in this idea that if you're more active, you need to consume more protein. And this formula is an attempt to take into account your activity level as well as how much you weigh. So this formula at the top is it's asking you to initially convert your weight in pounds to kilograms. And then you'll take your weight in kilograms and multiply it times a number that's somewhere in this range. And this is the deal. If you are not very active, you would want to use this number right here, 0.8. Okay, and the more active you are, you're going to move up the range to a top end of maybe 1.8. So, you could estimate on the scale of zero point 0.8 to 1.8 what your activity is, just, kind of think in general if zero point 0.8 is sedentary and 1.8 is highly active, well, where are you and what number should you use? On down here in the second statement, this is a position statement from several governing bodies that recommends that endurance and strength trained athletes have between 1.2 and 1.7 grams per kilogram. So a little bit different range there, but they're talking more so about athletes. So, if you're interested in calculating and seeing how you stack up, you could look back at your nutrition project again to see the number of grams of protein that you consumed on that one day. Now, the Chronometer website has attempted to provide you with a number that will be an approximate for what you entered in when you signed up for the account, because you had to let them know how active you were, your sex, your age, etc. And so they've probably given you an estimate that will be pretty close to what you've calculated here. So, a couple of clicker questions for you. The building blocks of protein are called, and hopefully you're remembering that insoluble and soluble, those are a couple of different types of fiber. Refined, that's a category of carbohydrate, and amino acids is the correct answer. and which type of amino acid must be consumed through foods and beverages? The correct answer is going to be your essential amino acids. All right, final slide, and then one more clicker question. So to sum this up, the calories you're consuming are coming from the three fuel nutrients: carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And what this is a breakdown of what percent of your daily caloric intake should fall into these three categories. And these are general recommendations. For carbohydrates, the bulk of your calories should be coming from carbohydrates, anywhere between 45 and 65%. And I like the range that they provide now. It didn't used to be that way. They used to give a more general prescription saying that everyone should have 60% of their daily caloric intake in the area of carbohydrates. That's been some time ago, but I like the idea that they give a range now. Um, People who are more active will want to consume a little higher in this 45 to 65% range. Um, for those individuals who are not as active, a lower percentage would be more appropriate. And then if you look over to the right here, there's a breakdown um, with the two types of carbohydrates being complex and sugars, or you could think simple, or you could think refined, even right here. Um, Here's that 10% rule that I was talking to you about in the carbohydrates um, presentation. And so we want the bulk to be complex, and we only want 10% or less to come from sugars. Now, total fat, saturated fat, the quote, bad fat, um, we want to keep our saturated fat at 10% or less. And that's 10% of our daily caloric intake or less. Proteins, the range is 10 to 12. You could use the formula if you preferred that, but just a reminder, be sure that you're actually consuming complete proteins, or that you're somehow getting all of your essential amino acids. All right, so one last clicker question. Which fuel nutrient should comprise the largest percentage of your caloric intake? And that's just what we were talking about here, the largest percentage of your caloric intake. Well, that's going to be carbohydrates. Okay. Thank you for hanging in there with me today. I've got a croaky voice. Um, I hope you've enjoyed these three presentations on the three fuel nutrients, and have a great remainder of your day.